Well, it's lift. My paradigm a lot of my programs, you'll see a lift, throw, jump combination.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So I don't call it complex training. I call it training. It depends on the phase and the time of the year. So, we'll do a lot of fast eccentric switching. Then there's times when there's more ballistic work, but the lift, throw, jump, there's your priming, your potentiation workout.
That was Vern Gambetta, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's podcast is sponsored by Gym Studio. Gym Studio is a frictionless gym and studio management software. It can effortlessly manage memberships, schedule classes, track attendance, and even automate billing. To check out what Gym Studio can do for you, head to gymstudio.com and set up your free 14-day trial in less than 5 minutes. Welcome to the podcast, and great to have you here. This week's guest is Vern Gambetta. Vern needs very little introduction. He is a globally respected leader in athletic development with over 5 decades of experience to his name. On the podcast today, Vern will be talking about methods that he's picked up decades ago and how he has incorporated those into his system. He'll be talking about isometrics, complexes, and what he calls spectrum training, so working through a variety of muscle contraction speeds and movement speeds. He'll talk about the priming or potentiation value of spectrum work, get into ideas on rhythm in athletic performance, this and much more on the show. It was awesome having Vern back. Let's get on to the episode. Vern, it's awesome to have you back on the show. And one of the things that I really appreciate, amongst many things, is just how curious you stay. Even now, you've been through it all. You've been through so many times of training, experiences with athletes, and you're still learning. And so that just brings me to my first question. Okay, the last 10 years, what have you learned in the last 10 years? You could say, yes, this has actually made a adjustment, a change, a different way of thinking about things, especially given everything, as I mentioned, you've learned and been through. Curious what you've been through in the last 10 that's really made an impact on you.
Curiosity's always been I don't know, it was going to a Catholic school. It was not an attribute that was rewarded. I got slapped across the wrist by the nuns a lot in that, because I always wanted to know why. And I have a title now. I don't know if you know that. It's called Director of Curiosity for Gain. I'm not in that, because I think I've always been curious why, going back, and we'll talk about sports, going back to when I started trying to be an athlete, like why people were able to do certain things, say that I couldn't do, or, things like that. And I think in the last 10 years, maybe even since the it's funny when you say turn of the century, this used to be, 1900 or something, but anyway, it's been more of a revisiting, looking at things. Obviously when you coach for a while, you have a system, and I started really, really looking in depth at what I was doing, and then my colleagues that use similar methodologies were doing, and really digging deep as to why they work, how we could fine tune in that, and I think the biggest lesson, and I'll probably say this about 20 times in this whole thing, the biggest lesson for me is that we, in my generation, and I think subsequent, but probably my generation, were way too volume oriented. Just looking at, we were so influenced by the Eastern European methodologies that looked at increasing number of jumps, number of throws, number of runs, sprints, all of that you need to look in. So I would say that's probably the number one thing, and it's, for me now, it's a little bit more often is the theme. And I would say that the results have been, well, in some cases spectacular, really, in terms of applying this concept. And then also recognizing in the last 10 years that our athletes ascending to the upper levels of sport and in elite levels and that are just not the same breed of cat as they were 30, 40, 50, almost 60 years ago, in terms of foundational movement skills, and that they're very skill skill dominant in a very narrow range of motions. So that has forced me to find ways to improve their athleticism within the context of improving their actual performance in that particular sport. So I would say those would be the main things, and without doing that and without going nut, having, adding more hours to training. And I can give you some examples of where, and I guess maybe I don't like the term microdosing because that comes out of drugs. And I'd learned this myself at least 55 years ago when I was trying to train for decathlon and teaching and coaching and all of that I call them minis, just 10, 15, maximum 20-minute sessions that really directed with intent and purpose can have a significant cumulative effect over a relatively short period of time. So I'd say those are the main things.
Yeah, it's interesting to see too. And well, one thing, you think about trends over time. It's like, okay, there's an introduction of a training stimulus, and then by nature, it's like, well, how far can we take this? It's like, okay, well, we're doing this much volume. Let's start with 30 depth jumps. And well, what if we did 40? What if we did 60? What if we did 80? It's like, okay, too much. And now we have to almost start over and throw a new paradigm, a new, lens into the equation. And maybe we'll start over with a new influences and thoughts. But that makes me think about things like swimming. I feel like the world of swimming, which we've both spent good time in, has seen this almost more than anything else, because that sport has taken volume to just an insane level. I'd hear workouts people did in the 70s and 80s, and obviously still even today. And then you get like, I think Cameron McAvoy at the last Olympics, like sprinter, saying he scaled down to like 3 times a week or something like that. It's just crazy.
3,000 meters total for a week, and that's a warm up for a lot of teams. Yeah, and having, pun intended, being totally immersed in swimming for the last 12 years, they still don't get it, I don't think. They look at McAvoy as an outlier, and I look at him as I think of swimmers that I'm working with, that I'm advising and coaches. You guys back it off. You can get so much more out of less if but whatever. It's and here's the thing, Joel, that we cannot deny the cultural aspects of a sport. And by the time you got to work with those kids at Cal, and now I work in an age group development situation. Now I'm working exclusively with, the best, whatever. They have been, it has been beat into them that they need this. So if you try to take that away sometimes too, it's, that's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
And in a lot of sports, people are rewarded for their, in quote, work ethic in soccer, because he goes out and runs 3 miles after practice every day and makes himself slow or herself slow, but that we've got to somehow get past that, and yeah, like I could get off on a bench on that.
For sure. It does bring up interesting thoughts on the, like you said, the role of belief, the culture, belief, like the long body, like Frank Ferencich talks about, all the things that are outside yourself in your community that make you who you are. And I think about, well, how long can belief in a program and kind of forcing adaptation within that model, and it can certainly work, but for how long? At what point do you have to say, okay, let's do something differently here?
Well, sooner or later, in a lot of cases, you break it down, but there's examples in swimming, in track and field, ironically, even in baseball, where some of the best have had significant longevity.
Yeah.
Now, again, and I hate this argument, but you have to look at their genetic endowment. It's multifactorial too. Yeah, but by and large, you can pretty much predict when you're going to go off the precipice, and and having worked with let's say somebody like Carlton Fisk and lengthening his career by 3 years, was cutting his workload by off the as a catcher, cutting his workload by over 50%, in terms of what he did strength training, and that, because at 43 or 41, you're not going to necessarily gain more on that. So look for where, and I think this is the thing that we need to do, even athletes in their elite athletes in their teens and their 20s, look for the spaces where where it's how would you say, it's free, I'm not doing a good job of articulating this. I hate low hanging fruit too, but it's there, and you can, in 5 minutes a day, you can improve that. And people say 5 minutes a day, that's not. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Work on hip mobility. 5 minutes a day, and you will see the results of that in 3 weeks.
Oh, yeah.
So no question. And look for the components of the things in your technique and in your sport that you can fine tune too. So
Yeah, it makes me think too about it's interesting when we look at training and later longevity. Like I love how well LeBron James is doing at his age, and I think it's funny how people will look at his workouts and make fun of them, being like, "Oh, this is just stupid stuff. This is playing around." But it's like, well, okay, what if that guy was doing what you consider real training and doing heavy power lifts and heavy power lift derivatives with the strength of force that he is capable of doing? Would he still be playing as well as he is right now? Maybe, but I don't know. That would probably have taken quite a toll on him relative to just playing the game and being a beast on the floor and just recovering and those kind of things. So it's interesting.
Well, I think that what sometimes we forget is training is preparation for the competition, and we lose sight of that. It's not an end unto itself. CrossFit it's a crazy sport, but it's a sport. It's an end unto itself.
Yeah.
But if I've got LeBron James or whatever, it's everything has to be directed toward improving his ability. First of all, his availability, right? Day in and day out. And it's yeah, and I think that, I mean, I don't generally like to talk about athletes I'm working with, but I'll mention them. I've worked with Summer McIntosh the last 2.5 years, who's world record holder in the 400 IM and 3 gold medals and a silver in Paris. And now is 18 years old, started working with her when she was a young 16-year-old, in terms of dry land and that. And that's what I just try to just preach and emphasize with her, that, Summer, you don't have to come over to the dryland area now and beat yourself up. Everything we're doing here is to improve your ability to turn better, to start better, to get longer and better shapes in your fly and that. And then at the other end, I have a 34-year-old now, Elise Perry, who's acknowledged as the greatest cricket player ever and a great athlete. I mean, if I would have been around her I would joke when she was 16, she'd probably be making 50 cents a day and be a heptathlete. But she played in the World Cup in soccer, and so what we do with her, and we're lucky that kind of the timing was right when we started working together. I think the powers that be had kind of given up because she just ripped her hamstring, slipped on a wet field, and and the stuff that they were doing just wasn't really helping her. And the goal when we started working together 2.5 years ago, okay, let's do everything we can do that's going to enable you to bowl and bat better, not make you so tired that you can't be efficient in that. And they play. It's a crazier schedule in many respects in baseball because they play about 10 months a year, so and that's where leading to this idea of these mini sections was really been reinforced with her. Like what can you do with priming sessions when you have a game tonight? Okay, if it's 3:00 this afternoon, she does it at 8 in the morning. And if it's 8:00, she does it midday. It's about 20 minutes, but the cumulative effect of doing that too, not only is it priming you for that workout, for that game, but the cumulative effect is you're constantly inputting into the system, and that's what you can do. And I think that's what some of these some of these players, I don't know LeBron James's program. I know a little bit about Steph Curry because my daughter worked for Rakuten and on his that tour that they were doing, and went to Japan with him and saw some of the stuff. And my daughter knows training and that, and that's what she said. I mean, she said it's spot on. It's what he needs to do for himself to get better. Now everybody tries to imitate it. It's for him too. It's his program. So yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Long-winded answer.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's all interesting to think about it, especially too, I was just thinking, sometimes I think about this is how do we get to this place where, like you said, means to an end, like strength means to an end. And it seems like we are in this place where those ends or means, sorry, not ends, the means get chased much farther than they need to. And is this because we have all the silos? We have, you're this coach, you're this coach, you're this coach.
Yep.
And
they don't talk to each other. Yeah.
Yeah. And also like there is, when you're that coach, it's like, why? It's more incentivizing to bring your end up more. It's like, yeah, this is my end of the equation. And where I've kind of realized, I think more of the incentive is actually finding the more deeper things that make that athlete tick. The quality of movement. It's not only, well, how much do they lift? And I also think that there's a lot of power in track and field, and you having that track background, because in track, you're coaching track. Back in the day, you did it all. You're the track coach, you're the speed coach, you're the skills coach, you're the strength coach for these athletes, and you are directly seeing the interplay of all these ingredients. So in that sense, it's easier. Certainly, it can be easily. I shouldn't say easily, but it can be done today to interconnect and communicate and talk. But I think having that base of, at least if you are the person who does it all and you're in the shoes of the person who does it all and sees everything, I think that's valuable for people. I wish we could experience that on some level for all of us,
I can't tell you enough how day by day, and sitting there this weekend, and it was a very good seminar, but I just so thankful for the background in track and field where, and also having competed in the decathlon at a very low level to understand how things fit together and how we, because if as a coach, if I did too much in the weight room, strength training wise, I was going to compromise something else, and I always believe very strongly in my middle distance and distance people that they have to strength train, and virtually nobody else would at that time in the 70s and the 80s when in late 60s. So understand that's if I could give advice to younger coaches coming up, get away from the specialization, and stop being a strength coach, because strength is the easiest quality of all to develop, measurable strength. And I think that when you look around and you see historically who the most, I don't know what you want to say, productive or whatever, people that were labeled as strength coach really came from track and field. Came from a different background, and now you have people that are just going into the whole pathway is they lifted weights, then they were a GA, assistant in college, then a GA, and never go on the field, never go out to the pool. I mean, that was the thing working with this athlete at Cal. I just said to help me, Dave. What's the head coach's name? David
Durden.
Durden. Yeah, I said, I really want to watch her swim as much as I can, because first of all, after the first session, I told her you're going to be really sore, and she happens to be a butterfly swimmer, so I never saw her swim before, and I wanted to see what effect that had, So how could I be effective helping her to be better, supporting her, if I don't see what she's doing as the end result, as the goal, right? And it'd be the same thing with track. If you're working with a high jumper, you got to go out and watch them jump and do all the things that they do in training to see how they're able to, and then you're going to find, jeepers, maybe I need to do more of this and less of that, too. So
yeah, I think the world too of even just like general skills and conditioning, like physical education, which I do think that realm of strength and conditioning, athlete performance and physical education, I'm sure it must have been so much closer back in the day, even to the point where I know a lot of like track coaches, like if you looked at the resumes of track coaches in the 90s or 2000s, that to my understanding, you saw a lot of, hey, they got their degree in physical education or a master's in physical education, where now it's probably more likely to have just a sport admin type degree. And
That's yeah, or sport, or in quotes, sports science, whatever sports science is. I don't know. I mean, I do know, but
yeah,
I sports sciences.
yeah, yeah,
Oh yeah, I mean, look, the first athletes that I coached. I said this. They asked me to be on the panel at the end. Are now 70, 71. I'm 77, and every one of those kids had mandatory physical education from elementary school on through. And I said, somebody asked me, because we had some really, really outstanding middle distance and distance performances, both in junior high and high school. And they said, "Did you ever train twice a day?" This was a few years ago. And I said, "No." And then I go, "Yes, we did train twice a day." Because the kids had PE and then they had track practice.
yeah.
It was physical. So they had paper routes and things like that. Yeah. Hey, look, I don't long for the good old days, right? We got to live in the present
Yes.
and recognize where we are and what we have to do. So I'm into solutions. Like what I mean. I love reminiscing about the old days. Particularly with those young men and young women. They're old men and old women now.
Yeah.
But instead of listening to them, because you find out what was really valuable to them, then it had nothing to do with winning meets or jumping high or fast or running fast. It was the experience. It was riding in the Volkswagen van on the way to the state meet in Berkeley and stuff like that. So which is really good information for me going on in the rest of my career. So I hope I'm doing it for a while. So
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, like you said, there is that like heuristic to say, oh, the past was better than it was, or or you could be more overly idealistic about the future. I think that fits into politics as well in many ways. But but it is, yeah, like you said, the past was ridden with over volume for sure, and then probably like overly copying some of the steroid heavy regimes and those types of things. And I do think, I do think there is a lot of good stuff now, and I think especially just with all the readily available information and podcasts, I think it's super helpful, and just being able to like sort and integrate those things. The thing I wanted to get into this, I just from what I've heard from you, and I do think. It's so easy to, not just with pro and high level athletes. It's like, okay, well, this pro athlete did too much heavy lifting. They ran out of, they started getting injuries at X age. But I think given that there's also a lot of acceleritis within youth, and it's like, okay, because there is weightlifting for youth, well, you see it just taken to way too high of a level too early. And often with uneducated coaches, just the football coach saying, hey, middle schoolers, go, you're on this powerlifting program now, that kind of thing. And it's just, you feel sorry for those kids. But like, I'm curious because I've heard you have this discussion on a podcast, and it does make me think of, you could say minimal effective dose or whatever that term is, but starting at the appropriate level for these kids. I think sometimes we forget you got a 13-year-old kid, just how little of a simple thing that can make a big difference for them. And so I'd love for you to share a little bit with, especially like that age of athlete, that beginning like to train athlete, some of the dosage there that can set the precedent for later.
And differentiate a gender too is really important. A 13-year-old girl and a 13-year-old boy are nowhere. It's not only are they male and female, there's a whole different endocrine hormonal environment in that too. But I'm not a minimum effective dose is a fine term, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it sounds to me, it sounds too negative. And I work with images, and images create actions. And I call it stimulus threshold. What's the stimulant, the threshold of stimulus that I can apply that will elicit optimum improvement, with no harm. I mean, do no harms, our first thing. And so you look at that. I mean, no question, you can take a 13-year-old boy. Well, first of all, if you want to load somebody, you can take a 13-year-old girl who has a decent activity background and take her in the weight room. And it's amazing the gains, even in traditional weight training, that you can make. Okay. A 13-year-old boy, it depends. Are they a early developer or not? But this is what all these football teams do all over Georgia, Texas, and that with these junior high programs. They start loading these kids early. and they're secreting more testosterone than in a minute than Lance Armstrong took in a day, and it's so they've got a rich anabolic environment to be able to handle this, but they don't have the structural ability to handle it. And that's where you pay the piper eventually, in terms of long bones and loading the spine and things like that. Can they do it? Absolutely. We see they can do it. But what it becomes very Darwinian, And so my principle has always been, going back to when I first, because I saw this 55 years ago at La Coubre Junior High, is body weight before external resistance, pull-ups, body weight squats, even crazy things like, can you do 10 burpees in 15 seconds, rope climbs, that kind of stuff, where you're really and you're really stimulating also tendon strength.
Yes.
Which we didn't realize, that farm boy strong idea. But it's really hard for coaches in sports like football and basketball now, because you get these early developers, and you in quote accelerate their development by the external loading in the weight room, and many of them, look, it may not, but we don't know about the ones that fall by the wayside, and could they do better? I would say unequivocally, yes, they could do better. So, it's not only a minimum effective dose stimulus threshold, it's developmentally appropriate. Appropriate is the key word, at, in terms of the biological age, and not just biological age, but, cognitive ability in that, to be able to process it, and I think that, it's easy to push them, and I think we have to learn. I don't think I've seen this myself. We have to learn to challenge them, to think and to look differently. And I now, gosh, it's hard to believe it was 12 years ago, but worked with a very, very good high school volleyball team, girls volleyball team in Venice, Florida. They were ranked in the top 50 of the U.S. and then always played for the state championship. And we were in the same weight room as the football team. And I would not let them squat under a weight for 2 years. And then when we did, it was just one day we had 450 pounds on the bar. We were doing an iso squat, and our little setter who moved the bar, and the football team looked, and it was dead silence, and the girls went nuts. Now, she wasn't supposed to move the bar, and I wouldn't, I had the angle set wrong, okay, but when that girl and two other girls went on their senior year to compete on the state weightlifting team and finished in the top 3 in Florida in the weight class. And they had never done, we had done dumbbell complex, leg circuit, all the stuff that I espouse, And so to me, that was a very strong validation, there, to see that. Now that was girls. And I think for all of you listeners, I think you really, really got it. Don't impose male programs on females. Okay. I always say, and I don't know, and people will say, will challenge me to explain this, that females need volume of intensity. Okay. They don't need more volume. They need a level of intensity that's a bit higher, and that you sustain that more often. And they generally, the females that I've worked with have had a higher level of recovery ability. Both Summer McIntosh I don't think I've ever seen an athlete have the degree of recovery ability that she had. She broke the world record in the 400 IM with no taper. And the 2 weeks prior to the Canadian Olympic trials, her workload was accepted. Now, it's not something that I would do. I know we cut back on dry land. I wasn't there day to day anymore. But and Elise is the same thing. Her recovery ability, because she's really smart and she really takes care of herself. And that's what you have to really, really drill in on that when you've got these developmental athletes. So And when I say recoverability, I don't mean cold baths and, all that kind of stupid stuff. I mean, just knowing your body so that you then, as a coach, knowing they know their body, they give you feedback, and that you cycle the work appropriately relative to their ability to recover from the various stimuli. So, long answer.
Yeah, I think that's so important, though, to talk about because, and it is interesting. I can see how people would ask you to explain yourself because it is good fundamentally for females to strength train. But then the question is, there's not to overuse the word nuance, right? Like, well, how and how to maximize their long-term ability. And it is interesting to think about, like you said. My mind goes to like world records and things, like the women's marathon world record, or like Katie Ledecky, the mile, the endurance in swimming, like. Relative to the absolute world record, those the top end of women's endurance ability is phenomenal, and it just makes you think about like what you said. Like, and I've heard that before. Women can take more sets or more volume, and even mentally or psychologically, it's been said that men can tolerate more acute stressors, instant stressors better. Like the lion attacks you, but chronic over time, women are better at just sustaining like that stress. So it's just
a level of work. No, there's no question. There's been a lot of psychological studies that have shown that too. Yeah, for sure. Sure. So, interesting.
You mentioned too. So I did want to ask you a little bit more about, just like progression, because like you said, I just love that too. By the way, that thought of like, what can I do with my body weight before I just, and again, strength is good, but it's also like, if that's all you have and you just start it really early, you almost miss on the opportunity to say, what can I do with my body weight? What other skills and coordinated strength abilities, and like you said, even rope climbing, things that can also bring in that muscle tendon complex in a different way, even the whole neuromuscular apparatus in a different way that I think we think is possible to be able to do that early. And so I just think that's so cool that you could do training that I'm sure if people saw it, they're like, oh, when are they going to get really strong? It's like, well, there you go. Do they have enough strength? Yeah, they do. Like,
I had a college strength coach say, how are they going to get strong doing that? And how do you know they're getting strong? And I pointed to the pool. I said, look at your school records in the last 2 years when we've been doing this program, and look at the PBM. So I have a rule, Joel, that never sacrifice range of motion for resistance. Never sacrifice range of motion for resistance. So when you start with body weight and then percentage of your body weight, dumbbells, kettlebells, and we'll use a bar where it's appropriate. But what I want them to be able to do is be able to make optimum shapes relative to what they have to do in their sport, and strengthen the connections and that they're able to make better shapes. And what that does is that develops a more robust athlete. And healthy athlete. What Tony Dungy say, the most important ability is availability. And because I don't have the answer in terms of all these calf pulls and Achilles things that we're seeing right now. I have an opinion, but I won't say it here. But and the same thing with hamstring. We're barking up the wrong tree, in terms of because we're sacrificing ranges of motion and isolating soleus and things like that. It's not. If you really want to look at depth, it's not working. Proof is in the pudding.
Yeah, like you said, and not to make a side trail too much or a rabbit trail, but I do think that's an interesting point. Even just with the Achilles, because like you said, I do think there's a lot of factors. You could point to a few for sure, but I do think it's interesting just from a paradigm perspective to think about. Jake Tour had just posted this, that runners, if you're a runner of any type, your chances for Achilles tendinopathy just go through the roof from that repeated linear motion over and over again. But as soon as you get into a lateral, like even for me, I've done a lot. I don't even know how many bounds and depth jumps I've done in hurdle hops in my lifetime. Wow. And I have to be careful and cautious of my Achilles. And if I go do a workout that's like change of direction shuttle sprints mixed with, say, sandbag carries, I get the same aerobic stimulus, a more multilateral body stimulus, and my heart gets trained really well versus if I went and run repeat tempo sprints, which I like repeat tempo sprints, but my Achilles will pay the price more for those. And so just that being said, it's almost in one factor of it is it's a complex versus specializing in that perspective of things, at least I think if you look at the microcosm and how those go together. So
interesting to do a whole talk on this.
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure.
One of the, you asked me about books. I think everybody needs to go back and read Tendonitis, Etiology, and Treatment by Kerwin and Stanish, which has been forgotten about because it was written in the early 1980s, and so they didn't have the imaging ability that we have in terms of, but they were right on. And the same thing with the other book is Mabel Todd's The Thinking Body, written in 1933. If you go back and read what she talks about, she's a dance instructor at Columbia. Does your Achilles take a pretty big beating in dance, and your knees and that kind of stuff? They had the answers back then. So anyway, I didn't mean to get off on the sidetrack.
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah, that's a whole show. Maybe some other time where like a panel or
Get Jimmy Radcliffe and I on, and we can talk about that. Like why hasn't he had calf pulls and hamstring pull? Yeah, he's working with sub 10 flat sprinters, and they're at higher risk, and they've had a couple, but push the envelope sometimes. So.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Athletic Development Games. The new Athletic Development Games PlayBoost Library is an app that is filled with engaging games to build athleticism in kids ages 4 to 10 in a fun way that builds a love of movement and movement learning. Games include those for speed, hand-eye coordination, jumping, and the essential athletic movements. The app is great for parents and also sports coaches and trainers who are looking to improve their own library of engaging games and ideas for athletes. To learn more and sign up, you can head to athleticdevelopmentgames.com/app. That's athleticdevelopmentgames.com/app. I was thinking about back to you mentioned the female athletes and like those skills and abilities that can manifest in, hey, you need to push weight. You have built multilateral strength that precedes it. And I was thinking about, to my knowledge, at least a fair amount of Olympic weightlifters, female Olympic weightlifters on the USA team came from, obviously this system is nothing like other countries, but like a lot of them have gymnastics, obviously, backgrounds, which makes perfect sense. But even swimming, like I've heard of a few swimmers, like more probably like, probably obviously not like your super lanky freestyler, but, but people who do have that as well. And it's just interesting to think about some of those abilities that, once you do pair that with heavier strength at some point, it's like, wow, yeah, this chemistry set works well, So
it's the chemistry set.
Yeah. So you mentioned isometrics actually, Vern, and I had wanted to talk to you about some other elements like some of the rhythm and tempo pieces you've talked about in training. I don't want to talk to you about the Gambetta leg circuit, but you mentioned isometrics because I think we talked about this a little bit on the last podcast, functional training. What is functional training? Coordination against resistance. But isometrics, because isometrics are awesome. You had mentioned them. So lest we brand you as, like, oh man, just play around functional. We cleared that myth last show, of course, but like isos and power and strength. Tell me a little bit more about that in your training regime.
Using isometrics in training since I first started strength training in 1963. And it's never not been part of my programs. Now, sometimes it was just complete blind ignorance and that. And, I go back to Alvin Roy and the San Diego Chargers strength training program from 1963, where they did functional isometric contractions, which was from Bob Hoffman. And then there was a guy, Dr. Pat O'Shea, who at Oregon State wrote a lot about it, where basically you'd set your pins in a rack and you say if your max squat was 400 pounds, you'd put 500 pounds and you'd drive it up for maybe 4 or 5 inches against the top pin, and then you'd hold it for 6 counts, and I did that, and man, the lifts went sky high. And then in 1987 was in Aix-les-Bains, France, at the European Athletic Strokes Conference, a guy named Gilles Comity, which all these guys think, French contrast training. You need to read his books. Most of them I read Spanish, so are in Spanish, and that really reignited me using that. And we use that. Summer McIntosh did it. But with sandbags and that, where we did what we call spectrum squats, where you do an iso hold for 20 seconds with about 40% of body weight. then you do 6 squats with the sandbag, and then you drop the sandbag and you do 6 body weight squats as fast as you can, and then you do 6 jump squats, and you do 3. And Elise Perry's doing that on at certain times, not free, at certain times. And so it's been a staple part of my program. And I'm sorry, I can be a cynical bastard, but I'm going like, come on, we've and now it's there's programs just built, I got to shut up because I'll be careful. I got to be careful and be a little more diplomatic in my old age, but it's not the answer. It's part of it's a multiple choice question with all of the above, and using isometrics, you can, you can increase recruitment. There's this myth that you only get strength within, that ran in 15 degrees either side, but it really helps stimulate recruitment. You play with it, just play with it. And I do these I call them spectrum workouts, where you go from isometric to fast eccentric to eccentric, fast eccentric dominant, because there's concentric work, to regular tempo, to total ballistic, type of work. But you can overdo it. See, so it's finding out within your system, where do you cycle it in? Now, I'm not going to say, because you don't use my system, it's not a secret, but I know where to put it especially now with particularly with summer, where to put it. I use it more frequently, ironically, with Elise, who competes all the time. And so she's in Australia or India or wherever she is, and we'll talk. And if she knows now that if she needs kind of a power stimulus, stick your finger in a light socket, okay, we'll do 3 sets of spectrum legs, and that seems to get everything, back on track, ironically. And why? I'm not sure, but I don't care in that sense, because I know what this particular athlete needs. And I guess that's also the other message here. So I don't know. So as far in a lot of the isometric work at the, has been come out of, and it never disappeared from rehab. So one of the books that I really recommend is Proprioceptive Neuromuscular Facilitation,
Yes,
by Knott and Voss. Because if you understand real PNF, there's an eccentric and an isometric component in it. It's not triphasic. The body is triphasic, if you want to say that. I can't talk right now and not have isometric, eccentric, and concentric actions going on. And to try to isolate them out is futile. And God, I could go on forever on here. So that's stuff.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I will say too, the last question to jump forward. We'll cover that one at the end, but like the books you'd recommend. I saw you had posted a PNF book at some point, and I remember it was
a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
It's funny. When I was in college, so that was 2002 to 2006, I did PNF stretching quite a bit after practice, just because, I don't know, I think we learned about it in sports medicine. I thought it was cool. I asked trainers to help me with it and things like that, and I really liked it. And then I kind of forgot. I went to grad school. I kind of forgot about it, like you do with a lot of things, especially because I don't think we talk about that type, especially in the sports performance. Maybe sports medicine still does a lot, but I was then at
It goes anymore.
It was really it's so interesting what gets lost. But I was at muscle activation techniques, like their Jumpstart program, which is based off like muscle testing and little isometric interventions. That was maybe 2014 or something. And there was a sports medicine staff. It was I remember this like it was yesterday. It was so funny. I'm at this seminar, and there's these MET certified people teaching the system, which I think it's a really intelligent system. And then, but there's some sports medicine staff from like the Chargers or something there. I don't remember. It was one of those pro teams. And the guy was like, "Oh, this is just like PNF or something." He's like, "Look at all this PNF stuff I have." And it's just like, and I know within the MET system, I'm sure it seemed very original, but at the same time, these concepts, these principles of isometric contraction, lengthening, they're older.
It's real quick. It was Dr. Kabat, Kabat, and the therapist that worked with him was Voss. I don't remember her first name. And they were at Kaiser Permanente Hospital over in Oakland. Okay. And polio was, before the vaccine, was and I was right at the time, was born before the vaccine, and it was, I know people that had polio and that. And so they developed this as a technique to rehab polio victims. So it was all done on a table on a mat, you see, because they were paralyzed, okay, and they got them back to motion. So, and the practitioners that were trained in that were trained that virtually, if you went to PT school up until probably 1980, 75, you were trained in PNF. And now all the practitioners are either retired or dying. And, it's a shame because we did it with the White Sox. Ironically, we taught our pitchers this routine of PNF, with which they would do out on the field, standing, every day. It's strengthening. There's an isometric and an eccentric component in that. So it's just understanding the idea that patterns and the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body and things like that. No, and who was it? Mel Siff passed away and, got fame through super training, was a big advocate of this. I remember in the 90s, he talked a lot about this at one NSCA convention, and gave a lot of credit to Naughton Voss and then how he adapted it. Yeah.
Yeah. I got to get that book in my bookshelf. I don't know why I don't right now, but it
training.
That super train I've had since for quite a while, but the PNF book is what I'm saying. The
PNF book is really expensive, but I think it's worth getting. It's worth getting. My niece, who's 30 now, is a DPT and was a college basketball player, and she's taking in-service thing at Kaiser Permanente, and she stays with us when she lives over the Sacramento area. And I showed her the book, and she goes, "Wow, this is really good stuff." So she's trying to incorporate that in her practice. But it's a shame that she doesn't have a true practitioner to learn from, because it's very hands-on. It's a manual therapy technique. Yeah.
Yeah. It makes me think, like you were talking about with your complex training schemes, because I think if you were to say, and this was a topic that I'd wanted to get into, so I'm glad you mentioned like the descending waves of those things, is that if you said, okay, complex training, our mind probably instantly goes to like a very heavy squat, like an 80% 1RM for 3, like this is what we did in grad school. We tested, we did a potentiation. Sorry, I was like, it's a P word in there somewhere. Potentiations test, and we had the whole class do. It was supposed to be like 85 to 90% of your 1RM on a hex deadlift, and for 3, and then you'd go and do a vertical jump or whatever. And it's just so funny because that test that we did, very few people actually jumped any higher. But there's so much like that's, you have to look in the study, because a lot of the people in my class actually didn't try very hard. I mean, not to like instrumental, but they weren't like going for it. I mean, like if you're gonna get that nervous system fired up, you got to load that bar, and I get to see some strain. And a lot of those people I didn't, and then they didn't jump in air. It's like, okay, well that was kind of worthless there. But even still, I feel like the people who don't get the normal potentiation, because I've heard it said, okay, you're a potentiation person, you're not. You could lift a heavy weight and jump higher, you might not. But the people who might not, what if they did a different stimulus, like kind of more what you're doing, more intermediate fibers, more sensation and sensory, and there's more of a spectrum of stimuli there. It's not just, okay, it's only the heaviest weight and it's only this jump. There's and all the way down to not just like pro athletes or high level college, but like youth athletes, developmental athletes, and everything in between.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's lift. My paradigm, a lot of my programs, if you share them with people, is you'll see a lift, throw, jump combination.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So I don't call it complex training. I call it training.
Yeah. That's disappeared.
So
I feel like
it really depends on the phase and the time of the year. So, we'll do a lot of fast eccentric switching, fast body weight squats, things like that in preparation. And then there's times when there's more ballistic work, and then but the lift, throw, jump there's your priming, your potentiation workout. That's what Elise does, before matches and stuff like that. It's 3 lifts. I mean, 3 by 3 of something, dumbbell snatches or something like that. 3 some tuck jumps and or maybe 4 bounds or something like that, because that fits well with bowling, and then some throws, did different types of throws depending, on that. So being, and you've covered everything, and yeah, yeah. So I'm a pretty simple character, and the cool part about going to this seminar this weekend is, and it was very oriented toward a lot of technology, and which I get, and I have used at various times, but my generation and a couple of subsequent generations, that we didn't have that, and we had to really carefully develop the coach's eye, and a lot of communication with the athlete, like you got to be really honest with me about how you feel, and that's again, these two women are amazing that way, in terms of they know their bodies, and they're really great communicators, too. So I'm very fortunate to work with that kind of athlete. So anyway,
Yeah. Tell me a little bit
about.
Oh, sorry. Go
Pardon
ahead.
me. Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, along the lines of that circuit, the descending circuit you had mentioned, starting with like the isometric holds and then moving into the squats and the jumps. The Gambetta leg circuit, that's been around for a while. And it's funny. My college, it's also funny. As an aside, I read work from like people such as yourself, Bush Exnator, and others. And a lot of that was very popular around the OOs or the 90s.
Yeah.
And those types of things. And I see that, I look back to what was in my college track training regime from 03 to really 05, 06, really. And I'm like, wow, that's maybe where my coach got that from, and the Gambetta leg circuit was in there. And there was one guy I remember, I don't think I got the effect this guy did. I think he may have been a little more intermediate fiber type than me, but he loved the Gambetta leg circuit the day before meet. He's like, oh man, I jumped so much higher. And for me, I did not get that. He did. So obviously not everyone's going to get that effect, but I just thought it was interesting because isn't that like density? And I don't know, for whatever reason, it helped him. But I found that I think he was a more muscular. I was a more elastic guy, not get into not naturally deep squatting is not a natural trait of mine. I'm more of a bouncing stick naturally. And this guy he was a 2-foot jumper, more of a deep squat guy. And maybe that just stimulated his legs more. I don't know, but I just thought that was interesting. Anyways, tell me a little bit more about the origins of that, because that's such a simple.
Well, the origin started with, there's 2 great skiers, the Mayer brothers, in the early 80s, and what was the doctor? Oh God, Stedman. Dr. Stedman was at Tahoe, and one of them blew his leg out, ACL. I mean, if you're a swimmer, if you're a skier. And they had this thing they called the Tahoe Marathon, and it was leg extensions and leg presses, about 6 exercises. And I saw it, and I go, oh, this is interesting. Let's fool around with something. So the original leg circuit was single leg squat, body weight squat, body weight lunge, alternating step up on a what would it be? Not 50, about 40 centimeters, 16 inches, 14 inches, right in there. And so we then worked with it, played with the rep range, kept everything about 10 body weight. It was okay. Got a lot of soreness. That was,
yeah.
And then when I took over with the White Sox, for 1 year, we kept the single leg squat in, and we added jump squat. And then I got the book Tendonitis, Its Etiology and Treatment, and they really emphasize the fascicentric. And Jimmy Radcliffe and I met now, and we were talking. So what it came to was 20 body. We eliminated the single leg squat because that was too affected by fatigue. 20 body weight squats, 1 per second, as fast as you could go. 20 body weight lunges, as large a range of motion as you can handle. Well, it's really going to be 1 per 2 seconds on lunges, alternating lunges, alternating step ups, 20, 10 per leg, and you get 1 per second there, and 10 jump squats. And so that became the staple, and the goal was this is really crazy. So if there's any of the former White Sox pitchers listening, they'll go into post-traumatic stress. So, and then the goal was, by the time they ended, in that case, spring training, was 5 full leg circuits without stopping. And I mean, and you could see their legs, you could watch their legs over 6 weeks. I mean, on top of everything else, and then, so we kept doing that, and it was fine. And I use it with my decathletes selectively, certainly not day before meets,
Yeah.
I go cycles where we go preparation, adaptation, application. And then I started playing with added resistance percentage of body weight, just because I'm a sicko and like to make people know. I'm just kidding. And then what we started playing around with right around the time you talk about, 2003, was half leg circuit. So 10 body weight squats, 5 lunges each leg, 5 step ups each leg, and 5 jump squats. Okay. And then you'd rest, and then you'd eventually build up to that, and then progress to full leg circuit. Okay. Well, then now what we do, which is really, it doesn't sound like enough of a stimulus, but it works really well. We go mini leg circuit. So it's 3 squats, 3 lunges each leg, 3 step ups each leg, and 3 jump squats. But what we can do with mini leg circuits, so we'll put a sandbag now on about 40% of body weight, and we'll use that. We've used that with, in swimming, with a swim meet on Saturday. They've done that. And it's very complementary to a lot of kicking. And I'd use that a lot if I were working with, well, I did it with Peter Callahan, a 337 1500 meter runner, and we cycle that in and out as it was appropriate, So, yeah, it's evolved, and I don't know where it's going to go. I mean, like the swimmer that I'm working with at Cal right now, she won't do leg circuit until after Christmas. So I just started with her last week. So there's a whole foundation, and you have to learn the rhythm and tempo. And like I said, never sacrifice range of motion for resistance, So like one of my decathletes did the full leg circuit with a 20 kilo bar. Now, he was 180 pounds, but that's pretty impressive, in about 5 minutes, if you've done it. So, but the tempo is really important, and the range of motion is really important. Yeah. So.
With the tempo on that, because this is a little bit of a side quest question. I had it listed as a question. This will be a great time to cover it, because I did want to get to some more pieces of that complex. But you've mentioned like the importance of rhythm and tempo in training. And yeah, I mean, do you, like, in terms of like 1 a second, do you do anything is there like ever time where it's like there's a beat or there's something that to follow with that, or is it just kind of associated, or how do you do that?
I mean, and I can speak for Jimmy. Neither one of us use, in terms, all trainings will velocity-based training.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's be upfront, and however you want to measure it, I know what it looks like, and really work hard on doing that 1 per second with, and again, load determines your tempo and rhythm too. And the rule of never sacrificing range of motion for resistance. So that's a big part of everything we do, whether it's med ball throws, whether it's jumps. You can hear the rhythm on jumps, and that, so come on, I want to expect, and you'll cue it, extend range of motion. Well, then it's instead of it's and I picked this up from a guy named Gerhard Osenberg, who probably one of the greatest track and field coaches ever at Bayer Leverkusen, coached Heidi Rosendahl and that. I didn't speak German, and they'd come over to Santa Barbara and train, and I'd follow him around, and he was always going, you're a high jumper, that's your last 3.
Yeah. I didn't hear that. For some reason, I couldn't hear you do the clap, but if people listening could hear it, Vern was, I guess, I no, I couldn't hear it. Yeah. Okay.
And music and rhythm and dance and, all of that. So I'm not giving very many scientific explanations. There's a lot of books here that substantiate, that idea and in terms of, recruitment and that. But if you come out tomorrow Tuesday, I'm just observing with USF track, University of San Francisco, and there's a German heptathlete and a Czech heptathlete, and we're laughing because I'm always they go, you're always clapping,
Yeah.
and so I don't know if I'm doing a good job of explaining it, but slow is it's contrast. Slow to fast is really important. Okay, slow to fast to explosive.
Yes.
And teaching them to understand and what that feels like. And I will just say it, you just got to coach the hell out of it. There's no set formula. It's hard to say a certain number of sets and reps. And those that have it, there are not very many of them. It's really, really natural. You hear it. You can hear the step patterns and things like that. You can hear, like, I love dumbbell snatch and dumbbell rotational snatch. You can almost hear a good lift like that, and as well as see,
Yeah.
Does that help, or is that just more confusing?
No, certainly. What I was actually thinking, I do agree. Like, I think that a lot of times you ask, okay, well, it should start with something quantitative. Like, okay, it's to every metronome. Like, I've seen like some of Jay Schrader's workouts. It's like, all right, you're going to do a jump lunge every 5 seconds, and you're in, it's like everything is there's a systematic framework. But ultimately, and I think those things can get people started, or even it's like, okay, this is what it's like. It's like, but ultimately you have to have that internally. You just have to kind of have it. And I think that's what the best athletes can do. They can internalize those things.
Yeah. People have asked about a metronome. We use it occasionally, but music is a better cue.
Yes. Yeah.
I know after I first started working with Elise, I sent her Sandy Nelson, Birth of the Beat. I recommend all of you play that for your athletes. And it's very heavy percussion, things like that, and find music that keys it, and but I think, again, I don't want to make it mechanical. I want to make them dance. Like, I want to make them feel the connection. I think that's what coaching sometimes is too much of what we do to the athlete rather than what we do with the athlete to guide them and let them explore the dimensions of movement in their body. I don't want to sound like some airy-fairy hippie from the 60s, because there's a lot of structure in terms of what I do. But I want to give the athlete the feeling of, because when they get in a competitive arena, it's a chaotic environment. It's not one every 5 seconds, and so, and that's where this idea of adaptability in that comes in, so, yeah.
Yeah. If you could almost separate those two worlds out in a way, in the sense that, I think, obviously, I just wrote an email about this where, like, 150 years ago, you didn't have a gym and numbers were on the bar. You didn't know what you were lifting numerically down to the pound. You didn't have a timing system. You didn't have any of those things. There was a lot more feel or creativity or just make do and different ways to, like, you're a strongman and you had to find ways to show people how strong you are, or whatever it was. And now it's almost like you can have too many numbers at the expense of, obviously, some of them, or many of them, extremely helpful, but you don't want it to become at the expense of the feel. And that's ultimately where any coaching is. And that's the longer I've been doing this, and not nearly as long as you, but I realize, okay, all these systems are great, but what really makes the system come alive is when the coach, like you said, it goes hand in hand with the athlete. The athlete embodies the system. The coach starts to feel the spirit of the system and knows how to break the rules in the system. It's not, well, here's all the numbers, do it just like this protocol. And so with anything, any coaching construct you could imagine.
The way I express it is, use numbers to inform you, but not drive you.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, let's go back to being a track coach. I mean, the beauty that I loved about going to track as an athlete from football, it wasn't no opinion now. The tape measure and the stopwatch didn't lie. Okay. So, I'm going to be informed by that. But you and I could both run 3x3 by 30 meters from a stand start and run the exact same time for all three of them with the same recovery and have an entirely different training effect. That's why it's hard. The hardest part for me with and that it is, I won't, I mean, I do because Elise is really special athlete and really smart, but doing stuff by online and stuff is really hard. I want to see how you achieve that number. Say,
Yeah.
I mean, I know that, if you're a high school, you're a high jumper and you do 3x3 by 30 meters and 4 flat, that's pretty damn good. But, you may not be able to walk tomorrow. And the other guy could come back and do, the same workout and do it faster, so that's what coaching is about. That's what coaching is about. Yeah. But it's so exciting. And that's what I came away from this weekend. If we can use the technology to inform, we certainly should be a lot better. Not, that's the key. And then picking the appropriate technology for your, actually, it sounds funny, but for your personality.
Yes. Yeah. I would agree with that. I would love to see that presentation because I think my personality is probably going to want a lot different technology than, what someone else's personality might be, for sure. That would be fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. Sure.
The thing that comes to mind is even that art is like, okay, if you teach someone to dance, you can put the little feet on the floor and say every time the tick goes, you step there. But that's that's just you moving to a ticker. There's not all those little nuances, all those surges of your body, all those little, you could say separations of joints and all the little things that make it come to life. That's the thing that's embodied art. And so I think about, there'd probably be a cool way you could show those key differences. But like you said, too, in rhythm, like I'm sure if you just you mentioned Steph Curry, I'm sure if you sat in the seats next to him while he's even warming up, you're going to hear a certain doosh, doosh, and then into the shot every time you're going to hear that thing over and over and over again. And just to listen and just pay attention to how these people move, I'm sure even if in a physical, not basketball, general sense, if you ask them to do basic activities, you probably could see a similar sense of rhythm that athlete just carries and can carry through basic movements.
I was over at the Warriors in June, and Ron Adams, I was sitting there watching these 3 players, and I mean, you could hear it was a drill 2-on-1 or something, but you could hear the footwork that led to a successful shot. It was clear, and I wear hearing aids. I'm deaf as a doornail, and I could hear it. So yeah, it's fun. You can hear a great run. You can hear a great jump. In baseball, you can hear a swing, man. When they in batting practice or something, when they time everything up, boop, you can just it's really interesting. Yeah. Training, you got to train yourself that's part of your skill set, I think, as a coach. To be able to create that level of awareness is important. Yep.
Yeah.
It didn't take me 50 some years to learn it. It just took me, it only took me about 10 years to come to the realization that was important. And then the next 10 years was understanding how to apply it, and then that's all the journey is. That's, if I want to keep getting better, hopefully I have 10 more years at least, I'm going to keep going down that path. So.
Yeah. I know. Back you mentioned Cal. I know Nort Thornton back at Cal. He was into his 80s, still reading, still giving me books. So
I mean, he's a mentor of mine and a hero of mine. I mean, literally almost up until he died. So it's hard to go over there and not see Nort or Pete Catino. It's I miss him. I miss his phone calls and that great man. And he was one of the early ones that cued me into the rhythm and tempo, in the late 70s, and you can hear it in the pool, really, and see it. You can see it. It's dramatic because water stops you if you fight it, too. So
you can't fight the water. That was one thing I really took away from swimming that stuck with me, even for track, and things like that with the track surface. They're like, there's always that harmony in everything, even a barbell, it's cool to think about those things. I did have, so with the contrast, I had just a couple things to close out. I just thought one thing you said, I love this. You said slow to fast to explosive. And in my coaching lifespan, I was probably, it was right about the birth of my first child. So I was about 32. And I remember that Cal men's tennis had sent me off to Las Vegas to watch Gil Reyes train a couple of guys who were working with some of our athletes in the summer. And it's cool because Steffi Graf was there. I was like, oh man, it's like legends. It's so cool. And Gil had all these like interesting machines and things. And one of the things I saw him do was a 5 reps. And it's just funny because Gil is so non-traditional. Like if you want to talk about opening another portal into a different world of training, like that was it. And I saw him doing stuff that was like, all right, you're going to do this exercise, 5 reps slow, 5 reps medium, 5 reps fast. I'd never seen that before. And I remember doing that with just like, cable knee drives and stuff. I was like, this is awesome. Like, this is really cool. Why is this not, why did no one teach me this before? 32. And so to see that, it is almost like if we look at those things, that were, I guess, lost, because I don't know, it's just, that was so powerful to me, just those basic, because now I feel like everything is so extreme. It's like, okay, it's extreme, the highest end of weights and the highest, which again, I think that has a great place. It has a great role, but there's all these other sub layers too that are so valuable. And so I just thought that was really.
Well, there was a concept, from the East, I don't know, I'll say the East Germans articulated it well, the speed barrier. And so if you do everything at, total effort, all out all the time, or you do it slow, then you become very familiar. Your nervous system becomes very familiar with slow. So why not within a rep or within sets, I'll vary, like just a dumbbell snatch will vary, angles and things like that, which will end up varying speed, so you have more of a mechanical advantage in certain positions than you do in others, so I don't know where that came from. It's just some of these things, I'm certainly not a frickin' genius, that's for sure, because I've made every mistake in the book, but it's just, it's trial and error and finding out. And then the beauty, I think, of age is being able to cross. That's what I was sitting there thinking, geez, I felt like an old man at this workshop, but I could hear them say stuff and I could say, yeah, I remember where that came from and that came from that, of cross-referencing, which is another thing that I would encourage young coaches to do. Like I'm ragging on Cal Dietz, but I go like, this is all this stuff this is ground that's been plowed so many times before, and you got to go in depth behind and understand all this stuff. Don't just take this and say, okay, now it's an eccentric, whatever. That sounds very unprofessional, but I mean, I respect what he's trying to do, but I some of it I just don't understand, so anyway, let's move on.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think it is interesting, like I said, with like the lower level contrast, to just dig into, so to do that yourself and see how it feels like. And I wanted to finish with the contrast, and this will be the last question I mentioned, and then I know you have an upcoming conference you'll share. So you mentioned like saving the fastest for last type thing, like the descending, like you start with the heavy and you get faster. Or even I've seen, it's funny, the first time I'd seen anything like this was Tommy John. He was Dr. Tommy John back then. He took some of like Jay Schrader's work where it's like hold an iso lunge for a long time and then take a little break and then do like 5 quick lunge hops at the end. And it makes me think about like Dr. Keith Barr talked about if you hold an isometric a long time, with the tendon, even on the level of the tendon, you actually start to expose and get to the core of that tendon that otherwise you couldn't access. And to me, it's so cool because it's almost like sometimes we think about, well, everything is fast, everything's maximally explosive. Forget anything longer than that, just throw out the window, whatever, we don't need it. But it's like, well, what if that stuff opens a little portal? I use that word twice because I guess now, but it's like getting at something new that you couldn't, and to do so without necessarily, and again, I like the heavy weights, but you maybe don't need it for that thing as much, and that could you have used for other populations. So I just thought that was really cool that you have different things that you lead to those fast reps at the end. And that friend of mine who did jump better after the Gambetta leg circuit, I'm sure he needed those squat jumps at the end. He did not do the single leg version. That probably would have messed him up, like you said. But yeah. I think he needed those jumps at the end to like almost get in his fiber types deeper and then give him something new that he didn't have before.
Recruitment order. Yeah, no question. Yeah. No, I put a lot of that, and that's what if you had a Lisa and you asked her what was the big, she did all the traditional stuff, heavy back squats, all the Olympic lifts and that. And Eddie Jones was the iconic rugby coach, and he's a big fan, Aussie, big fan of cricket. And we all had last November, actually a year ago this week, breakfast together, and he I'm sitting at least to my right and Eddie to my left, and he says what's been the biggest difference now that you guys, you know, what you worked with Vern and what you're doing? And she says, rhythm and tempo.
Nice.
And I just had to chuckle because, but we do a fair amount of stuff like that. So the initial start of a rear foot elevated split squat would be 6-second ISO hold and then 6 reps, you know, things like that,
Yeah.
you know. And the beauty was that she was the one that opened that door. That's really good. I feel really good when we do that, you know. And somebody else could say, I feel like crap, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you do. And you know, you be careful you don't go nuts with it too.
Yeah, for sure. That's like the beautiful thing about training is that this isn't, if it was suddenly the magic protocol that worked for everybody, it wouldn't be fun anymore. You know, it would work for a lot of people. Some people won't, some people will. But yeah, you know, as you were talking too, I was just thinking something I've been on to a lot that I just love is exaggerating error or amplifying error method in motor learning. I love it. I'm so sold on it for all sorts of athletic movements, but I feel like even in basic movements, it's almost like, and not even necessarily, in some ways, it's like wrong is a context because it's richness. It's like, well, doing something very wrong is actually very rich information to the brain. It makes the brain pay attention. And then that's the same thing with like, oh, wait, I need to go slow in the weight room. Wait, I need to hold this. What? And it's like richness, you know, and then you go fast. It's like, oh, yeah, like you just give all this information to an athlete. And there's that, like you said, you're working with them. They're the ones sorting it out. You know, I'm not telling you, you know, how to hold this. I mean, maybe a little bit, at least you're in the right position, but not all the little nuances. I try to say that stuff's so cool. I think it just makes things come alive in so many ways as well.
Well, the body's, I don't want to say it's mysterious. It's there's a high degree of complexity, you know, in the body, but which makes it really fascinating to learn these different patterns and then see how they apply to different people. You know, like you said, learning through error. You know, relaxation is the key to sprinting, but if you really want somebody to learn how to relax, I want you to run 40 yards and I want you to clench your fist, stretch, run as tight as you can. I want you to do 2 of those and then do that. Don't tell them how to do the opposite.
Yes.
Do the opposite. They go, oh, yeah, I get it. You know, like how hard is that to figure out? But that's what you were doing.
Yes.
That's the way you were running. You know, so, but it feels, you know, anyway.
I love that you mentioned that. Not to interrupt you at all, but dude, that's exactly what I've been working on just for myself. And I do program exaggerate the error, but this has been more new to me because I will watch a lot of my videos I did, especially when I was in my mid 30s, like doing videos for my books or images for stuff for like Speed Strength, the book. And that was the first time I saw myself do a depth jump on camera. And I was like, man, I just saw like all these, I think it's the platysma, like the muscles in your neck. They were just like strung out and like all this facial tension. I was like, I do think I had more than normal when I was younger, but I think I've picked up more and more over the years. And I think about how that impacts everything down the chain as well. I even watched a video of myself high jumping for a demo recently, and I was taking off and I just see like masseters like clenching, and I was just like, ugh, like, and so that's exactly what I've been doing. Not necessarily for sprinting. I totally would. I love that. But even just other exercises. I've done it for a few accelerations, but just even basic lifting, just tense your face as much as you can and then just let it go. And that is so much the beauty of that. I'm sure you agree with me. It's that you're not telling the athlete what to do. Like you said, you don't say, now do this. It's like, no, just go be an athlete. And all of a sudden it's magic. You know, it's like, it's so good.
Relax, win.
Yeah.
Relax to win. Bud Winter just standing next to him. I didn't, you know, and listening to him coach. And that was, let your eyelids flop, smile, you know, things like that. No tension. That's how you express force, and force goes into speed. Yeah. Cool.
Good stuff.
So,
let's finish. Yeah, tell us about the books. I can't forget the books. Sorry, I gave you an impossible challenge. So if there's more than 3, that's fine. Books for young coaches, growing coaches from the past. Yeah, what are books?
He mentioned all of them. Track and Field Omnibook. Any of the not the new edition. That's not. And Science of Swimming by Doc Couselman for sure. Proprioceptive Neuromuscular Facilitation by Knott and Voss. Kinesiology by Logan and McKinney. written last edition 1973. Got to have that. You got to have that. The Thinking Body by Mabel Todd, written in 1933. She was a dance professor at Columbia. Really brilliant. It's brilliant. And again, recognize it was written without slow, video analysis and all of that. Okay. Principles of Sport Training. And this one is starting to get expensive. Introduction to the Theory and Methods of Training by Harre, Harre, East German, not because it was East German, very systematic. Track and Field, textbook for coaches and sports teachers, Smolinski, Schmolinski. That was the fundamental track and field text in East Germany. A whole chapter on Marxist-Leninist ideology, so skip that chapter. The Triple Jump Encyclopedia.
Oh, I have
Ernie.
Yes.
And
so good.
It is brilliant. They put a lot of money into making that. And then there's 2 books on circuit training. The first one is Circuit Training by Adamson and Morgan. And they were the pioneers of circuit training at Leeds, Manchester University. It was Leeds in 1958. And then the other one that is Circuit Training by the Scholitz, Scholich, which was the East German plagiarized version of the other one. And then the last one, I think this is the last one, and this is the French version, X-ray, no, just kidding. 1,000 exercises d'adlesami, I'm not very French, by Murer and Bucher. But the original 1,000 exercises was an East German methodology text. But I'm sure you can find versions. I bet you can find free PDF versions of those online. So there's a lot more. But I think those are pretty good places to start, if you're interested. So.
Yeah, I know. I wrote down the Thinking Body there. That'll be going in my classics section here soon.
All of you and the listeners, if you get run, read the Thinking Body. Yeah, I would say that would be. I try to. It's funny because when you put that up this morning, I go, "Gosh, I haven't read it since we moved. I've got to go back and go through it." There's certain books, Omnibook and that I try to read at least once a year, sometimes more. And it's not when I say read. I'll page through and look at and a lot of times I'll look at my underlining from when I first got the book in 1973 or something, and go like, why did I think that was important then? Maybe I need to revisit that too, so because I have a system of underlining I use, but that's another time. So, what I'd like to do is make people aware that we have a Coaching by Design workshop, Coaching by Design workshop on the 14th and 15th of December at Notre Dame High School in Sherman Oaks, which is LA. And it's myself, Nick Garcia, great, not a young coach anymore, and he's almost 50 now. So great success there. And Jimmy Radcliffe from University of Oregon, good friend, colleague, and Brian Fitzgerald, probably one of the best sprint coaches that nobody's ever heard of, who would magically take 11-3, 11-4 boys and turn them into 10-4, 10-5, and had relay teams consistently. And he was Marion Jones's high school coach before she got big-headed and left, so she ran 11-3 with him and that. So, but and the idea is it's going to be a lecture or a didactic session followed by a hands-on demonstration, followed like that, and then after the morning and after the afternoon. And at the end of the last day, we'll do the whiteboard session because we're saying coaching by design to help you. The biggest thing that I see now is help you put the pieces together. Connecting the dots is really the theme, because it's so hard. Even I went to this workshop this weekend, and that's, I think, a strength that I have. But I started thinking, geez, they could have connected the dots, for everybody too. So anyway, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to mention this, and appreciate you giving me the opportunity to be on. It's an honor, and you're doing really good work, and and your generation of coaches, it's the future, and I think that I'm really interested in helping and simplifying in a sense. Simplicity yields complexity. I mean, there's a plethora of information available at your fingertips now that wasn't there, when I started a coach. I mean, the amount of money you mentioned, super training. The first time I bought super training, it cost me close to $100 because I had to order it from South Africa. There were still limitations and, things like that. Well, I wanted it. I needed it. So, that's what you do. But now most things are at your fingertips. So anyway, so thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. You're welcome, Vern. It was awesome to have you on the show. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to another episode. I appreciate you listening to the podcast. I'll see you next week.